You're listening to the Fresh Hell podcast. Fresh Hell contains stories of a disturbing and often graphic nature and is intended for a mature audience. Please don't let your kids listen to this, or they might turn out like us.
Hi, I'm Annie from the US.
And I'm Johanna from Austria, and you're listening to your favorite international podcast. This all started out with an online friendship years and years ago, and we still haven't met in real life, which absolutely does not mean that this is not a real-life friendship.
That's right. Johanna and I talk almost every day. We know each other's pets and snacks and sleep schedules, and we've gotten through some really, really hard moments together. Those of you who have been listening from the beginning have also sort of come along on this journey with us, all without ever being in the same room. So yeah, if you're new here, hi. Hi.
Hi.
You're officially listening to a podcast hosted by two women who have mastered the art of being close to each other and to you from far away.
I love that.
Right? Before we start, we'd love to give a huge shout out to our newest Patreon members. So we would like to especially thank our mystery member, Skip Clobber, and our new murder tier member from Australia, right? Carol Lavender. Thank you so much. This is wonderful.
Thank you.
Love to have new people joining the group. Thank you. Really, thank you so much. You're the reason Johanna and I can spend way too many hours researching 1910 sellers instead of doing something sensible like, I don't know, who can say, laundry, perhaps. It's fine.
True.
Everything here is totally under control. If you want early access, bonus episodes, ad-free episodes, or just a way to support the show, you can join us over on Patreon. We would love to have you. And now it's time for the penultimate part of our Crippen episode, and we have a super quick refresher for you from Johanna. There's a lot happening, so much.
So far we talked about Dr. Hawley Harvey Crippen, the quiet American homeopath living in Edwardian London, and his very outgoing, rather dramatic wife, Belle Elmore. Their marriage was kind of a mess, and then Belle suddenly went to America, wink wink. I'm doing air quotes here and wink wink. Well, I said it. Crippen's explanation didn't make sense to anyone who actually knew her. Her friends finally went to Scotland Yard and Inspector Walter Dew paid Crippen a visit. Only to find nothing out of the ordinary, just an estranged wife who had run off with another man. Which was embarrassing, yes, but definitely not unheard of. Belle's friends wouldn't let it go though, so the chief inspector returned a few days later only to find the house empty and both Crippen and his secretary and lover, Ethel Le Neve, gone. Dew searched the house properly and uncovered a torso buried under the cellar floor. Meanwhile, Crippen and Ethel were sailing across the Atlantic under the fake name Robinson. Captain Kendall of the Montrose became suspicious, compared Mr. Robinson to the newspapers, and used his brand new Marconi wireless to send the world's first criminal manhunt message straight to the heart of Scotland Yard. The message read, quote, "Have strong suspicions that Crippen, London's cellar murderer and accomplice are among saloon passengers. Mustache taken off, growing beard. Accomplice dressed as boy. Manner and build undoubtedly a girl." End quote. And that's pretty much where we left off last week.
So Captain Kendall of the SS Montrose sends this telegraph on the 22nd of July, 1910. And at his desk at Scotland Yard, Chief Inspector Dew is probably working at the case when the message reaches him. The message was short and to the point. And for 1910, this was extraordinary. Scotland Yard was not used to getting information from ships that were still at sea. Wireless telegraphy wasn't standard on every vessel yet, and Dew immediately understood how unusual and how useful this was. He read the message and everything clicked into place. Dew had already suspected that they'd left the country, but now he finally had a direction. The problem was, what now? The Montrose was already well on its way to Quebec, and the police needed to get there before them so that they could arrest them on arrival. So Dew immediately looked for the fastest ship leaving England that could reach Canada before the Montrose. That ship was the SS Laurentic, a White Star liner, new and significantly faster vessel that happened to be sailing from Liverpool. The ship could travel 3.5 miles an hour faster than the Montrose, but still, Crippen and Le Neve had a 3.5-day head start. Within hours, Dew was on a train heading north, and by the time British newspapers could even catch wind of what was happening, Dew was already halfway to Liverpool, preparing to cross the Atlantic himself, all under a fake name as well, because why not? He was John Dewhurst. Hello, Mr. Dewhurst. It's fine. So clever. Smart man. So, meanwhile, on board the SS Montrose, Kendall spent the next 9 days keeping a watchful eye on the Robinsons. You know, that weird father and son that was giving everyone the ick. He didn't know yet that Dew was not far behind them. Dew had tried to send telegraphs to the Montrose many times, but for whatever reason, it just failed every time. I feel like we get annoyed today, you know, when you're somewhere and it's just, your just text messages are just not going through. Like they should be going through. Yeah. Why aren't they going through?
Why aren't they going through? Yeah.
Can you imagine?
Kind of that situation, I think.
Yeah, it's exactly that feeling, I think. So Kendall paid close attention to the pair. He's watching them. He's got his eyes on him. He later talked about how Master Robinson, the supposed teenage son, really did behave kind of like a shy, very polite young woman rather than a boy. Quiet, always smiling, and never speaking unless spoken to. And her clothes didn't really help the disguise. So what had happened was the trousers were way too tight around the hips. And they had split in the back because of this, and they had sort of safety pinned them back together. So it was obvious that these were not his trousers, you know. Crippen, or Mr. Robinson to the crew, also stayed very close to Le Neve, constantly. Kendall noticed that they were rarely apart and that she seemed to take cues from him almost immediately. He described her as someone who didn't seem distressed, but who also didn't seem capable of making decisions on her own. To him, it looked as if she was completely dependent on him, almost eager for approval whenever he looked her way. Crippen, meanwhile, appeared increasingly agitated as the voyage continued. He spent a lot of time on deck with a book, although Kendall wasn't convinced that he was actually reading.
Well, I can so relate to that. You know, this kind of thing where you stress, but you try to read, but then you read the same sentence like 500 times.
Right.
And
Kendall's like, I'll be damned, that book's upside down again. Like, what's he even... Their conversations also raised red flags. Crippen mentioned that he was planning to take his son to California for his health. He sprinkled medical terminology into casual conversation, something Kendall found notable given that Mr. Robinson was supposed to be a merchant, not a doctor. At meals, their behavior didn't match a father-son relationship either. They ate at the captain's table where Master Robinson's manners were noticeably feminine. She handled her cutlery delicately and even picked fruit from the serving dishes the way a well-brought-up woman might. Crippen fussed over her constantly, cracking nuts for her, giving her portions from his plate, and paying her the kind of attention that did not look parental in the slightest. The more he watched, the more convinced Kendall became that this was not a father and son. Le Neve did not appear frightened. She also didn't seem to be acting of her own free will. Kendall thought she had very little strength of character and was completely under Crippen's control, almost as if she were under hypnosis. Toward the end of the journey, Crippen's nerves became more obvious. He asked questions about where the pilot boat would meet the ship, how close it would come to shore, how soon they would reach Quebec, and whether he could get to Detroit quickly by boat. He also spoke vaguely about wanting to start a new life in California, on a farm of some kind. Meanwhile, the newspapers were following the story closely because Kendall had been sending wireless updates to Britain. Reporters turned those updates into a kind of ongoing serial. The public knew the Montrose was being shadowed and that a man suspected of killing his wife might be on board. And not only the public was highly enthralled by the whole racing a fugitive across the Atlantic, on July 30th, Home Secretary Winston Churchill asked for a detailed update on the case.
I just added this headline to see how they kind of, reported this while the chase was still going on.
Amazing.
I found it just interesting.
It's amazing. Yeah, there's a photograph we have, Johanna's got, of page 9 of the Sunday Dispatch from July 31st, and we'll share it. And it says, "Ocean chase for Crippen and Miss Le Neve." And then there's like pictures of each of the people involved and pictures of the Montrose and the Megantic and Miss Le Neve.
Even Captain Kendall.
Yeah, this is some exciting shit right here. This is good stuff. This is...
Even the first wife of Crippen.
Yeah, she looks good.
Is there. Yeah.
She's a handsome woman.
Now, Dew had been worried that the Montrose might already have reached Canada before he did, but as soon as the Laurentic reached Farther Point, he realized that his worries were absolutely unfounded. And if you're not familiar with Farther Point, or Pointe-au-Père, as it's officially called, it's a spot on the south shore of the St. Lawrence River in Quebec. And in 1910, around the time, this was one of the main places where transatlantic ships stopped to pick up a river pilot before heading further inland. The St. Lawrence is long and rather shallow in places, and navigating it without a local pilot was basically asking to run your ship aground. So whenever a liner arrived from Europe or wherever, a pilot boat would head out from Farther Point, and the pilot would climb on board, and the ship would continue upriver toward Quebec City. And this was absolutely a routine part of every Atlantic crossing.
So, not to interrupt, but this is a thing that still happens. And whenever we are on a cruise, you all know I was on one earlier this month with Paul for his poker thing, but we always love to watch for the pilot and see if we can watch to see him get on and off the ship. And it's so cool to see them because the pilot boat comes revving up next to you, even though it doesn't feel like you're moving that fast. You're watching someone climb down the side of the cruise ship and hop onto the deck of the little ship, the little boat next to it, I just took a video of it, so I will share it. It's really a cool thing. And then everybody sort of cheers and waves and says thank you, and the pilot waves back. And then they take off looking real cool, like it's like a cut scene from Miami Vice. It's very good. It's good stuff. I'm not lying. If you know, you know. But yeah, shout out to all the pilots all over the world getting all the ships safely to dock, because that's still how it works today.
So yeah, and that's exactly what happened here. The Laurentic with Dew on board arrives at Farther Point, and the press also was already there waiting for him because, they had all these articles about the chase going on, and the reporters were obviously hoping to get the big scoop and to be the first to report the imminent arrest. And they even welcomed the Laurentic by cheering, 3 cheers for Inspector Dew. He was not happy about that, by the way. But that's how he knew, the Montrose hasn't arrived yet. He was there first, because if the Montrose would have arrived, the reporters would be kind of all over them, basically.
Right. Do you think he was like, you mean do Hearst? Hearst. Don't blow my cover.
There is no do.
There is no
here.
do. There is only do Hearst. Stop it.
You think he had like a fake nose with a fake mustache over his real mustache?
Yeah, I think he did. I think he might have. I think he cried alone in his cabin about this later on. It's fine, he said.
But what he didn't have was authority to actually arrest anyone in Canadian waters.
Son of a bitch.
And so the local officers were waiting for him. And their names were Chief Officer McCarthy and Detective Denis from Quebec City. So they would be the ones carrying out the formal arrest once Crippen and Ethel Le Neve were hopefully located. So on 31st of July 1910, Dewhurst borrowed a pilot boat pilot's uniform and climbed into a small boat with McCarthy, Denis, and the actual boat pilot. And from a distance, it would have looked like a group of men heading to guide the steamer in, which is nothing unusual. But Crippen was watching from deck with the ship's doctor. He even made like a comment saying, "It's weird how many pilots seem to be arriving on that boat." Captain Kendall already knew what was happening because he had been warned by a wireless message that finally went through, and he was waiting on the bridge to greet Dew and guide him to where the Robinsons' cabin was located. On the way, Dew saw Crippen in one of the passageways, and even without his trademark mustache and the glasses, Dew recognized him instantly because the eyes were unmistakable. After weeks of searching, Dew suddenly had the absolute certainty that the man in front of him was Hawley Harvey Crippen and that Ethel had to be somewhere nearby, so the hunt was over. McCarthy and Denis brought Crippen into Kendall's cabin, and Dew then told him he was being charged with the murder and dismemberment of his wife Cora, committed in London around early February. Crippen must have remembered Dew, right? Because he had this one kind of half day of almost full day of interrogation in his office with him, you remember?
That's right. Also Crippen had the kind of eyes that, like, there are just certain people, certain famous people are easy to think of, right? Who, it doesn't matter what kind of disguise you have as long as people can see your eyes. Like Susan Sarandon, You're not fooling anyone. You know what I mean? Like there are just Steve Buscemi.
Betty Davis.
There are so many people whose eyes are the most characterful part of their face. And sorry, Crippen.
So, okay, Crippen is brought to talk to Dew. And meanwhile, McCarthy and Denis search Crippen and they find pieces of Cora's jewelry on him. And they also found 2 calling cards printed with E. Robinson and Co., Detroit, Michigan, presented by Mr. John Robinson. On the back of one card was a note that read, quote, "I cannot stand the horror I go through every night any longer, and I see nothing bright ahead, and money has come to an end. I have made up my mind to jump overboard tonight. I know I have spoiled your life, but I hope someday you can learn to forgive me. With last words of love, your H." The other card was a shorter message. "Shall we wait until tonight about 10 or 11 o'clock? If not, what time?" What do you think why he had a calling card with E. Robinson and Co.? Like, did he find them somewhere and just took the name Robinson? Because, I mean, he didn't have them printed while he was in Antwerp.
No.
Waiting for the ship.
I wonder about that too. Were they really trying to get to Detroit? Was that just a fake? I don't know.
I just really think they found the calling card somewhere and were like, yeah, okay,
Probably.
We're going to take this identity.
Yeah, that
we're
makes
going to
sense.
call ourselves Robinson.
That makes sense.
So, do you believe that the handwriting was Crippen's and that he had genuinely been contemplating suicide before reaching Canada? Crippen, however, gave a very different explanation. He claimed that a quartermaster had shown him a warning letter 2 days earlier saying he would be arrested in Quebec, and that the quartermaster had offered to hide him in the cargo hold until the ship reached Montreal. According to Crippen, the dramatic suicide notes were props for this supposed plan. And the quartermaster intended to create a splash in the water to convince the captain that Crippen had jumped overboard. So, a fake suicide. Faking his own death. Captain Kendall, though, didn't believe the story at all, and when the Montreal Daily Star printed it, all 4 quartermasters on the Montrose issued sworn statements denying any involvement or contact with Crippen. Meanwhile, Dew went to cabin 5 where Ethel Le Neve was waiting. She was still in her disguise, the brown suit, the hair cut short, the whole attempt to looking like a teenage boy. So he addressed her as Miss Le Neve and she responded yes. And after he identified himself and informed her of the charge, she became very upset and fainted. Crippen, on the other hand, told them that he felt relieved as the strain had been too much, he was very stressed out. And when McCarthy handcuffed him and explained it was because of the suicide note found on him, Crippen said he wouldn't harm himself and that he was glad the anxiety was finally over. Dew performed a more thorough search and found additional pieces of Cora's jewelry hidden in Crippen's clothing. Crippen asked about Ethel, and Dew said she's alright, she's distressed, but she's being cared for. And Crippen insisted that she knew absolutely nothing about what had happened and that he had kept her entirely in the dark about, his wife, Cora, or Belle. Ethel confirmed that she hadn't seen any newspapers during the voyage, which was true because Kendall and all the other officers on the Montrose had made sure that, that there wouldn't be any newspapers, because then Crippen would have known that he was being hunted down, right?
That's right.
So, and then as soon as Dew was able to, as soon as he had time for it, he sent a wire back to London, which read, quote, Crippen and Le Neve arrested, wire later, Dew, end quote. And then the next day he sent another which read, quote, confirming former cable, arrest made. Arrive Quebec midnight Sunday. Suggest Maton and Mitchell. Crippen threatened suicide. Writing soon. Dew, end quote.
From the moment of the arrest, the two prisoners were kept separately. Crippen remained in Kendall's cabin under the supervision of McCarthy and Denis. Ethel stayed in her own cabin, guarded by female staff where possible. The Montrose still had hours to go before reaching Quebec City, so the rest of the journey took place with Crippen and Ethel effectively confined on board. The other passengers wouldn't have necessarily known what was happening unless they'd seen officers moving through the corridors. Kendall had kept the matter as quiet as he could. By the time the Montrose docked at Quebec City, later on the 31st of July, 1910, both prisoners were ready to be taken ashore under police escort. Crippen and Le Neve did not disembark with the other passengers. Instead, McCarthy and Denis arranged for them to be taken off separately and quietly, using a controlled exit that avoided the worst of the crowd. Even so, the presence of international press made a fully discreet removal impossible. Reporters were shouting questions, trying to see who the officers were escorting, and photographers were already preparing their flashes. Crippen, his face kind of wrapped up in a scarf, also wearing a hat, was escorted. He looks very much like, it's like the Invisible Man, isn't it? He's just wrapped as much as he can. Yeah. But they're very much leading him, escorting him off the ship. And you can tell who he is because he's the one with no face. And then Le Neve, is she in the back of this photo? Is there a tiny hat?
I'm not sure because we see two women, at least two, or we see maybe even three women emerging.
Maybe. Definitely.
Because I see 1, 2, 3 heads.
I see.
And I think she's probably the one in the middle with almost, I think she had to be kind of supported.
Yeah, I agree. I think her head is bowed so no one can see her face.
Yeah.
So they're taken off the ship, and from the docks, they're taken straight to the Quebec City jail, which served as the temporary holding location until the British authorities completed all the necessary paperwork to have them returned to England. Crippen and Ethel were held separately, with Ethel placed in the women's section. Canadian officials treated the whole situation with the seriousness it required. The case was already a transatlantic sensation, and the fact that wireless telegraphy had been involved made it an even more unprecedented situation. People were really interested. With the suspects finally in custody, Dew's next task was getting them back to England to stand trial, a process that would be followed by crowds, reporters, and intense public scrutiny every step of the way. While Dew was planning the when and how to best get the two suspects back to the UK, Crippen and Le Neve were held at the Quebec City jail, but of course, as we said, separated. Crippen was on suicide watch 24/7. During the first extradition hearing in Quebec, roughly 3,000 women were there, in front of the courthouse, trying to catch a glimpse of the so-called London cellar murderer. They came out because they were curious about the infamous Dr. Crippen. But there was one problem. They weren't expecting this Dr. Crippen. Thanks to the newspapers, especially the more enthusiastic ones in Britain and the United States, Crippen had been painted as this mysterious, cultured, slightly tragic figure, the kind of man who might inspire a fainting spell and ultimately, unfortunately, might kill his wife. The papers described him as soft-spoken, refined, intelligent, possibly brilliant, very misunderstood. The whole doctor fleeing across the ocean with his young lover storyline had been reported with the tone of a serialized romance, not a homicide investigation. The public filled in the blanks the way people always do, with their imagination. A gentleman doctor, a forbidden romance, a dramatic escape, disguises, a chase across the Atlantic. It all sounded so much more glamorous than it really had been. But then, instead of the dark, brooding, Byron-esque-inspired villain they'd been picturing, this man in custody looked... Well, he looked like Dr. Crippen, didn't he? A small, balding, bespectacled 48-year-old homeopath from Michigan who, if you passed him on the street, you'd assume was on his way to politely return a library book. It's often this way, isn't it? People are forever amazed that the most terrible people generally do not appear to be so awful when you see them. And vice versa, right? It's like there are people are like, I don't understand why they're with them. They're not very attractive. And it's like, well, have you met them? They're amazing. It goes both ways.
So yeah, Dr. Crippen himself was a bit of a letdown for many, but the media still went absolutely bonkers with the whole story, and so many articles were printed daily. In the UK, in Canada, in the US. Some were factual, others not so much. And very often it's hard to say if they were one or the other. So for example, this one. This is from the San Francisco Chronicle, Tuesday, 9th of August, 1910, printed on page 1. Hint that Crippen murder is a fake. Report that Detective Dew has intimated that it is a press agent hoax. Okay, very intriguing. Buffalo, August 8th. A special dispatch to the Chronicle. Quote, is Dr. Crippen the premier of all press agents, and is the Belle Elmore murder a fake for theatrical advertising purposes? It seems rather improbable speculation after all the evidence of the murder Scotland Yard has found, but nevertheless deep in the back of Inspector Dew's head there is a glimmer of a suspicion that Dr. Crippen may have hoaxed the entire civilized world for the purpose of bringing his actress wife into prominence and fat salary. Inspector Dew was in Buffalo for a short while Saturday night. While talking with some friends at a late dinner, here the Scotland detective let drop a hint of his suspicions that the Crippen murder case might be a deliberate fake to advertise Crippen's actress wife. He pointed out that no identified body has been found, and that the torso discovered buried in quicklime in the doctor's London home has not even been proved that of a human being. Nobody knows for certain as far as the police have learned that Mrs. Crippen is not living. Should she reappear, she could be booked for music hall vaudeville appearances at almost any price. Few letters allowed to reach Dr. Crippen. Letters and telegrams addressed to Dr. Crippen are accumulating in the provincial jail, but he is allowed to receive or answer only the cable messages from Arthur Newton, his London attorney, relating to the preparation of his defense. Fully a dozen letters and as many messages have never reached a prisoner because Jailor Morin has adjudged them improper to deliver to a man in Crippen's situation. All are from the United States or Canada, and most of them from attorneys, but at least one or two are enclosed in dainty square envelopes and addressed in a distinctly feminine handwriting.
Ugh,
End
stop it.
Quote.
All right. So, while the newspapers are making up the wildest stories, Dew is working on getting Crippen and Le Neve back. Even back in 1910, extradition wasn't a simple put them on the next boat kind of a situation. Even though Britain and Canada shared the same monarch, the legal system still required a lot of paperwork. Crippen was technically in British territory, but the ship had sailed into Canadian jurisdiction, and so everything had to be done by the book. Dew spent the next couple of days doing what every detective secretly dreads: paperwork and red tape. He had to work with Canadian officials, sign statements, verify the arrest, provide documentation, and ensure that Canada was satisfied that this really was the man wanted for murder back in London. Obviously, there was no objection to sending Crippen back. Canada had no interest in trying him themselves. The crime had taken place in London, and the London police had done the investigation. While all of this is happening, the press outside the Quebec jail only grew. Reporters were interviewing anyone who had even briefly glimpsed Crippen or Ethel, and the telegraph offices in Quebec were sending updates back to Britain faster than the ships could sail. Back inside the jail, the conditions were surprisingly ordinary. Crippen was kept in a men's cell, Ethel in the women's section, and neither of them caused any trouble. Crippen spent most of his time sitting quietly, asking occasionally for news of Ethel. She was still upset, understandably, but she was no longer fainting at every turn. So, progress. The staff noted that she was polite, soft-spoken, and clearly overwhelmed by everything happening around her. Once the extradition paperwork was finished, Dew had one more goal: to get Crippen and Ethel out of Canada without making a spectacle of it. And this was no easy task, as the entire continent was watching. His solution was to quietly board a small local steamer called the Queen, ride it downriver, and transfer onto a White Star liner, the Megantic. If all went well, they'd avoid the crowds entirely. And it worked pretty well. Kind of. Mostly. It was fine. And then we have a funny little side note to share. So we read about this in the book Dr. Crippen, the Infamous London Cellar Murder of 1910 by Nicholas Connell.
Yeah, and I think Nicholas Connell got his information from Dew's own biography that he wrote later on about the Crippen case and his involvement. I think it's titled something like I Caught Dr. Crippen or something like that.
And so those are kind of the sources for this particular story. So Crippen was being escorted across the gangway from the Queen to the Megantic. He's handcuffed and his hat is pulled low so that no one would recognize him, right? Invisible Man style, like we talked about before. And I don't know, you think the handcuffs and the fact that he's being escorted by a bunch of official-looking guys would have given his identity away, but fine. Anyway, the problem was that because of the hat, he could barely see anything, and because of this, he walked directly into one of the ropes that was holding the gangway in place. It hit him under the chin, and it knocked him backward so hard that if Dew hadn't been there to grab him, he might have gone right into the river. So, thankfully, Dew caught him, and no one had to jump after Crippen that day. So, solid. So, they're all traveling under assumed names, or at least that was the plan. Dew loves an assumed name. He chose the alias Silas P. Doyle, a name one irritated journalist later mocked in print as silly ass P. Doyle. Oh no. Oh no, Dew, come on. It's the aliases. They get him every time.
I just can picture Dew. I mean, he was probably great at his job, but every time something like this happened and they was like, well, the first thing we got to do is we got to pick our aliases.
Do you know who he reminds me of in So I Married an Axe Murderer? The best friend. Is it Anthony LaPaglia who plays him? He's like the best friend, and he's a police officer, and he wants the chief to treat him like they treat Starsky and Hutch, and like yell at him more. They want. And he's always like, "We need a chopper. We don't need a chopper." I don't know why it's giving that kind of vibe in the best possible way. He solves the crime. Spoiler alert. So, okay, so they're under their assumed names. Dew is, as we said, Silas or silly ass P. Doyle. Crippen is Cyrus Field, and Ethel became Mrs. J. Byrne. Drew later bragged that no one would have guessed who they really were. But the surviving passenger list disagrees because it has just all their real names are listed, so it's fine. The aliases must have just been for theater for the passengers.
Yeah, probably.
Once, I went to a birthday party at a casino, and we played a game where we each chose, we were talking about vintage names. My grandma was called Honey, and one of my mom's friends was Bunny, like those old from the 50s, that terms we don't really use anymore for nicknames. And so we'd all had a couple of cocktails, and we came up with our vintage names. And then for the rest of the night, if anybody called you by the wrong name, they had to buy you the next drink. And it was hilarious. And that's kind of how I imagine, like, just the three of them very intentionally using these very specific names. You're going to be in so much trouble if you don't call me by Silas P. Doyle. All right. So once aboard, Dew formally reads the prisoners all the charges, and Crippen answers his understanding the charges with a simple right, and Ethel says yes. And overall, Crippen's behaving like an ordinary, polite passenger while on holiday. He ate well, slept without any trouble, and he held long, friendly conversations with Dew on everything except the one topic you would expect, Belle. That name never crossed his lips. Dew later wrote that he'd never met anyone quite like Crippen. He was soft-spoken, calm, and surprisingly steady considering he was facing a murder trial. It's giving Anthony Hopkins in Silence of the Lambs. Several times a day, he asked about Ethel, never about himself. Dew said that if you didn't know what the man was accused of, you might assume he was just a middle-aged professional on his way home after a long trip. When the Megantic hit rough weather near the Irish coast, most of the passengers were seasick, including Ethel. Crippen wasn't. He remained stable throughout the storm until he heard that Ethel was ill. Then he became anxious. He told Dew that the best cure was champagne. I'm sorry, doctor, what? You're nauseous and vomiting? You know what you should have? Fizzy alcohol. Let's add some of that to your system and see how that feels. And he was like, you must give her the champagne, please. And Dew didn't initially realize he was talking about sending champagne to her. But then once he realized, Crippen was said, oh, please, Mr. Dew, give her a little champagne and I will be so grateful, right? Okay. So Dew gets a bottle, according to him, and I guess Ethel did perk up right away. And Crippen, when he heard that she felt better, was apparently immediately relieved.
Dew also noted something that surprised him. Under his clothes, Crippen was physically stronger and more muscular than his quiet demeanor might suggest. Dew, who was heavier, later admitted that he would have not wanted to have to fight him. Both prisoners were watched constantly. Their meals came from the first-class saloon, but were cut up in advance because, obviously, steel knives absolutely were prohibited. Anything that could be torn into strips, like ropes, cords, even the wire mesh on ventilation fans, all of that was removed from their vicinity. Every night, their cabin doors were padlocked and guards slept in the rooms with them. They were taken out separately after dark for short exercise walks on the top deck, and only after the crew made sure that the area was secured and empty. Meanwhile, Ethel's father, Walter Neve, was publishing a series of articles about her in a magazine back in UK. He believed she was absolutely innocent, and so he was trying to raise money for the legal expenses that were coming their way. Well, which he expected that all of this would cost a lot of money, and he would not be wrong. When the Megantic finally approached the Liverpool landing stage on 24th of August, crowds lined the docks, hoping to get a good look at Crippen. But Dew was like, nah, let's not give the press and the looky-loser show. So as soon as possible, he hustled Crippen and Ethel off the ship surrounded by police. And I think how they did it was that the normal passengers left through on the gangway. And there was another gangway below that was used to unload the luggage. And that's how they left the ship. And Dew was delighted to be back in England. If nothing else, he was rid of American journalists whose relentless pursuit had absolutely exhausted him, and he then told the British press, quote, "It is quite a pleasure to meet English pressmen, for they are gentlemen," end quote. And I think judging from the yellow press in the UK today, I don't think Dew would still have to say that nowadays about the English press.
The British tabloid press is terrifyingly problematic, isn't it, really? So, yeah.
Yeah.
Behind the scenes, Sir Melville Macnaghten admitted just how close Crippen had come to escaping. The case had nearly been shelved after the first searches revealed nothing, and Crippen had been so calm and cooperative that he raised no suspicion. Macnaghten later said that if Crippen had simply stayed in his house and endured the gossip, the police might never have gone back, and Belle's disappearance might still be unsolved. if the name Melville Macnaghten sounds familiar, it's because he's one of those big Scotland Yard figures who shows up in several major cases of the era. By 1910, he was the Assistant Commissioner of the Criminal Investigation Department, essentially one of the highest-ranking detectives at Scotland Yard. He supervised the Crippen case from above, while Dew handled the actual fieldwork. Macnaghten is also the author of the famous Macnaghten Memoranda on Jack the Ripper, where he listed the suspects he thought were worth taking seriously. So yes, this man keeping an eye on the Crippen investigation had already been involved in one of the biggest mysteries of criminal history. So, the Megantic had arrived in Liverpool, and then Crippen and Le Neve had boarded the train to London. When the train finally pulled into Euston Station, it was immediately clear that the calm they had just experienced during the ship part of the voyage was pretty much over. Word had spread hours earlier that the Megantic had docked in Liverpool, that Inspector Dew was bringing the prisoners down by rail, and that they would be arriving in London sometime that afternoon. By the time the train hissed into the station, Euston was absolutely packed. Hundreds of people were waiting, some angry, some curious, some simply excited to say that they had been there. Londoners are like everyone else. Who doesn't love a good event? The moment the carriage doors opened, the crowd responded with a low collective groan that turned into booing. The following is from the Eastern Daily Press, Monday, October 29, 1910, page 5. Quote, "The arrival in London. Hostile demonstration at Euston. It is a long time since Londoners showed so much interest in any event as they did over the arrival of Crippen and Miss Le Neve in London on Saturday. All through the day, papers sold like wildfire, and at 2 o'clock, when the news came that the Megantic had arrived at her destination, people flocked to Bow Street, not seeming to realize that some 4 hours must elapse at least before the prisoners could reach London. To preserve order and to prevent the court getting overcrowded, extra policemen were put on duty, and as demonstration was anticipated, quite a considerable force was kept in readiness for any emergency. By 5 o'clock, there was an enormous crowd outside Euston Station, and not exactly an orderly crowd either, for decidedly uncomplimentary remarks were heard about the doctor. A few people got on the arrival platforms and had to remain there, but the police cleared them off at about 6. At this hour, the approaches were still thronged, Drummond Street and Seymour Street being about impassable. Those within the station gates were carefully shepherded by a large force of police, and only a privileged few got past them. Men and women climbed trucks, lampposts, ladders, and any other possible coign of vantage in endeavors to obtain a glimpse of the arrivals. Very few, however, had the satisfaction of seeing them when they got in about 7, the train in which they were being about all that thousands saw, and many not even that. The excited masses made wild rushes from one side to another as the different trains arrived, and after numerous disappointments, there was much speculation as to whether the pair would actually arrive at the terminus. Doubts were settled at about 5:30, when the experienced eyes of the pressmen present singled out several of the spectators as members of the Criminal Investigation Department of Scotland Yard. These officers were joined by Chief Inspector John Kane, who, in the absence of Superintendent Frost, at present on holidays, is in command of the detective department at the Yard, under the Assistant Commissioner Sir Melville Macnaghten. He was accompanied by several well-known detectives, and at once began to prepare for the arrival. Number 1 platform was cleared of people by the railway police under Inspector Allen, and a strong detachment of men of the S Division in charge of Superintendent William and Chief Inspector Fitt. Some distance down the platform, a barrier was erected behind which an immense crowd flocked, but from which they were soon removed by the police to accommodate a large body of waiting pressmen. They're like, "Get all the crowds out of here, we have to make room for the press." Much further down this platform, another barrier was put up, and behind it the ordinary public were allowed to gather, with very little hope, however, of seeing anything except for the train itself. On the opposite side of the platform, a stationary train obstructed the view of those who had congregated there, and at the exits, strong forces of police kept at a distance the too curious. 3 taxicabs were in waiting. Warning of an arriving train is usually given at Euston by the ringing of a bell to show at which a particular platform an incoming train will arrive, but this was dispensed with in the present case, and at 6:48 the train known as the American Special ran into the station. The saloon carriage behind the engine still had its blinds closely drawn, and the crowd, guessing that in it was Crippen, commenced to boo and hoot. No sooner had the train come to a standstill than officers rushed to the door, and Crippen, heavily muffed, was hurried into the first of the taxicabs. Miss Le Neve, also cloaked and veiled too, was put into the second. She stooped very noticeably as she walked. Into the third cab jumped Inspector Kane, Mr. Dew, and other chief officers, and all immediately drove away, avoiding the immense crowd gathered at the front of the station by turning out of a side gate. Very few people witnessed the actual departure, but when the news spread that the prisoners were leaving, there was so much hooting and booing. Within 2 minutes of the arrival of the train, the little procession was well out of the station, and through the big side gate leading on to Seymour Street poured excitable people who had seen nothing, but were derisively booing, a lot of booers. Others, finding the police had once more beaten them, rushed for the great gates of the yard, but these were promptly closed. End quote. Lot of booing. So much booing.
Booing and hooting. So, okay, yeah, Dew just hustled all of them straight into the cabs, and they head directly for Bow Street Police Court, where serious crime cases began before they were passed onto the Old Bailey. And when we say the Old Bailey, we are of course talking about the Central Criminal Court of England and Wales, which is basically the highest profile criminal court in the country. If someone in London was accused of murder, treason, a major violent crime, or anything else dramatic enough to make newspapers, this is where the trial would take place. But we'll talk more about that when we get to the trial. For now, they are at Bow Street. And Bow Street was already overflowing when they arrived. There were reporters, photographers, curious passerbys, the looky-loos, a strange mix of moral outrage and ghoulish excitement. Police linked arms to clear a path while the public tried to push forward for a glimpse. And inside of Bow Street, the atmosphere was completely different, very controlled, very cool, very calm, bureaucratic. Whatever chaos was happening outside in the streets, Bow Street itself ran like a machine. And then Dew handed over the initial paperwork, and Crippen and Ethel were being processed, separately of course. And so Crippen went first, and he was taken down a narrow staircase to the basement cells, which were tiny brick rooms with iron doors, designed to be tolerable for a night or two, but this was not for a long-term stay. And he remained calm and polite, even at this stage. Several officers later noted that he seemed almost relieved. Ethel was taken to a separate holding area, and she was noticeably more shaken. Holloway Prison loomed ahead, and she knew that. She had already fainted at least once, if not more, on the Montrose, and she was pale and trembling, so she was very stressed out. She would be transferred to Holloway. She would be placed in the women's wing, where she would wait for the magistrate to determine her future. But both prisoners spent 2 nights at Bow Street at the cells there before their first court appearance. In the meantime, the press set up camp outside the building, filing constant updates. And when Monday morning came, the courtroom was so packed that some spectators had to be turned away. The magistrate presiding over the hearing was Robert Marsham, and Dew later would say, he described him fondly as looking like a prosperous farmer. Ruddy-faced, he said, large-framed, and very practical. And this Robert Marsham was known for keeping a firm hand on sensational cases, which was exactly what this situation required.
Crippen was brought into the courtroom first. He stood calmly, hands folded, listening as the charge of murder was read. He barely reacted. Several reporters commented that he looked tired but composed, which only added to the public's fascination. This wasn't a ranting monster or a dramatic villain. He looked like a quiet man, unimpressive and average. Ethel was brought in separately. Her charge, being an accessory after the fact, was read just as formally, though the tone in the room shifted. People pitied her. She was small, frightened, and visibly overwhelmed. Public sentiment had already begun leaning in her favor. She was seen as too young, too inexperienced, too controlled by Crippen to have really known what was happening in that house on Hilldrop Crescent.
Do you find that interesting? I find it interesting because I would have thought that she would have been seen as the seductress, because many times it's more, how there's always a kind of sexism going on, and it's always, the women are always the ones who are responsible for everything because they are seducing the men to do things, right?
Yeah, that's right. So neither Crippen nor Ethel entered a plea. This wasn't at that stage yet. The point of the hearing was to formally acknowledge the charges and remand them to prison until the case was prepared for trial. Crippen was sent to Pentonville Prison, the same institution where the worst criminals of the era were held before trial and where executions took place. Even in 1910, it had a grim reputation, high walls, strict routines, and a silence rule that made the place feel like a tomb. Ethel, meanwhile, was taken, as we said before, to Holloway Prison, where the women's wing was used to house everyone from petty offenders to those awaiting trial for serious crimes. She was placed under observation as she was still fragile from the shock of her arrest and the crossing, but Holloway staff reported that she adapted far more quickly than expected. Within a few days, she was calm, polite, and cooperative. Outside the prisons, the press frenzy only intensified. Newspapers ran every detail they could get, real or imagined. They printed diagrams of the Crippen house, described the contents of Belle's wardrobe, speculated wildly about the torso found in the cellar, and published daily analysis about what kind of man Crippen really was. Ethel became a separate subplot. Was she a victim, an accomplice, a seductress, or just a naive girl in love? And Bow Street itself became a circus. Every time Crippen or Ethel was transported between court and prison, crowds gathered, sometimes so large that entire streets had to be closed. People climbed lampposts, gates, even each other, just to catch a glimpse. Behind the scenes, though, the legal machinery was grinding forward. The prosecution assembled its evidence. The torso, the poison, the basement bricks, the pajamas, the letters, the wireless chase, and Crippen's inconsistent statements. The defense began preparing around one central idea, to question whether the remains were really Belle's. It would become one of the most debated points of the entire trial, and one of the most controversial forensic questions in the modern re-examination of the case. And all of that, the trial, the experts, the verdict, that would come next. But for now, in late summer 1910, London wasn't thinking about court transcripts or forensic debates. The city was obsessed. Crippen was in Pentonville, Ethel was in Holloway, and the case was about to take over the Old Bailey. And I think this is the perfect moment to stop for today. Next week, in the final part, we will talk to you about the trial and the aftermath because there is so much more to talk about.
This is one of these cases where we go in and think, oh, this is going to be maybe one very long single part or maximum 2-part episode. And then it turns into this as I gesture vaguely at my laptop.
Yeah, but you know what? Like, there are so many podcasts out there if people want the 30-minute version, if they just want to hear somebody pleasantly read the Wikipedia article and discuss it, like, that is out there. That's out there for you.
Listen, how could we not tell you about Crippen running into a rope, knocking him almost into a river because his head is pulled down over his eyes?
I love it so much.
Like the Invisible Man. Like, there's no way. We have to tell you.
How are we not going to tell you about that? That's right. So, do you have something good this week?
Do I have something good? Wait, I had something. Let me think.
Your tour.
Oh, yes, my something good. My friend Ingrid from Hamburg was in Vienna for a couple of days. And first of all, her son also came, and both of them took my mom to a concert of André Rieu. You know André Rieu,
yes.
the violin player? Yeah. So they had a lot of fun. And then a couple of days later, I met with Ingrid, and we did a tour of the Natural Science Museum. How do you call it? Hot punch, what we drink at Christmas markets here.
Oh yeah, like Glühwein?
Well, anyway, I had alcohol free because I was driving. But anyway, we did that on the rooftop, on the roof of the Natural Science Museum. And that was amazing. The view, I'm gonna try to post a video. And then we went to the Zentralfriedhof, the central cemetery in Vienna, where 3 million people are buried.
Wow.
151-year-old, our biggest cemetery in Austria. I talked about it, I think, several times already. And we did a night tour there. The cemetery itself closes when the sun goes down, when it's dark. But for special tours, they open. And it was so interesting. And I got a couple of ideas for episodes I want to do. But also it was so cold. It was so unbelievably cold. We were freezing. It took 2 hours. Then it started to snow. It was windy. And yeah, we were frozen when we got back to the car. And then driving home, I took Ingrid home. And then I drove home which is usually like 50 minutes, but it took me like 1.5 hours because the snow and the wind was just too much. It was, and the next day I woke up to a lot of snow, which really was something good for Jem and Leela because they really enjoyed it.
I love the videos you sent me of Jem and Leela in the snow.
It's so cute.
It was so funny. In one of them, I was like, "Are you walking in the woods at night in the snow?" Yeah. She's like, "No, I'm just rural. I live in the middle of nowhere. This is what everything looks like." It's like, "Oh, all right, that's fine then."
Everything looks like this, yeah.
Oh man.
How about you?
Yeah, you know what? Today is Black Friday in the USA. This is going to come out the day after Thanksgiving.
Not for our patrons. Our patrons might be confused now, but remember you have early access.
Oh, that's right. Early access. So if you're not a patron with early access, then this is coming out on the Friday after Thanksgiving for everybody. And that is my birth mother's birthday. And it's nice this year. One of my brothers and his girlfriend is off traveling the world. So we've been following them on their TikTok adventures. And my other brother is a police officer and his fiance is like a trauma nurse. And so do you think they ever get holidays off? They do not. But my sister and her husband and my niece and my other sister Moose and my birth mom and my dad are all coming here for Thanksgiving. And it sounds like it would be a lot of work because hosting Thanksgiving, but I outsource and just order it from a local restaurant and then I put it in the oven to heat it up because I am not well enough to do that. I am going to make a soup, everyone. I'm going to make I haven't made it in years. I stopped cooking when I started getting migraines, but I'm going to attempt my butternut squash kind of apple soup to make tomorrow, kind of for an appetizer for Thursday night, but we'll see how it goes. But anyway, yeah, it's my birth mother's birthday. And I realized it just passed like the 9-year anniversary since I met them. And it feels like a million years ago. Like, I feel like I've known them all forever now. It's like amazing to me how quickly our families just integrated. But that's kind of how I've always been. Like, I have a lot of last names because when my late husband was killed, I stayed very close to my whole family, that family. And, you know, when Paul and I got married, I'm very close to his family. And it's kind of the way our families work. And I just feel really lucky that the way her family worked was kind of exactly the same way, if that makes sense. So it's just going to be nice because, you know, with my health and whatnot, like my house is kind of always a mess and it is what it is. But like these people they don't judge. They just come in. We have a great time. It's nice having it here because if I feel crappy, I can just go lie down in my own bed. You know what I mean? But I'm just really looking forward to it. I'm just really, really looking forward to it. And I'm so glad that I was able to find my birth mom, and I'm so glad that my mom was able to meet my birth mom. I really wish that my mom had been with us longer, because the more I get to know Annette, the more I laugh and think, oh man, Ginny would have loved that. Like they really would have hit it off big time, which is nice. So yeah, that's my something good. It's just like holidays with your chosen family, and holidays where you don't have to stress out because people just understand your situation, and it's just about great times and watching a bunch of movies and chilling out, So happy birthday. That's my something good. Just finding my birth family.
Absolutely something good.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no need to yeah.
Yeah.
I also stress out on Christmas, but
me too.
It's minimal stressing out. Like some people really go Griswold Christmas vacation stressing out. And
I can't do it.
Try not to.
No, I have to be so careful. That shit sends me to the hospital these days. Just keep it cool. Keep it calm. It's all good. All right. So if you enjoyed this episode or any of our other episodes, it would mean the world to us if you would please take a moment to rate and review the podcast wherever you listen. It really does help other people find the show. And Johanna, in fact, if you don't mind, I thought it would be fun to feature one review a week, like at the end of the episode.
That's such a great idea.
That we were really touched by. And I thought of this when I read a very recent review. So don't worry, I'm going to go back. We'll go back and find old ones, but we're going to start adding a nice review at the end because it's always something good, right? So this one was from just this past Tuesday from Vice CEO Treasures. Macabre dark history is perfection. 5 stars. When dealing with such morbid topics and murder and mayhem, these women handle it with respect and the kind of morbid humor that is required to stay sane in the face of all that is wrong in this world. I love their banter, their mutual respect, their gallows humor, and the stories are darn right engaging and interesting. A must for true crime fans. End quote.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vice CEO Treasures.
You can also subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you're listening on Spotify or YouTube, you can leave us a comment there as well. We love hearing your thoughts, your theories, your corrections, really, or your add-ons. Or sometimes we are like, we don't know the answer to this. Maybe someone out there, and we always get a reply. So we love that.
That's right.
We got a lot of people messaging us about the comedian with the smashing
Gallagher
or something. Yeah.
Gallagher, also a friend of the show, Thea, last week in the Facebook group was like, a sack is a lightweight jacket, a short jacket.
Exactly.
It's like, okay, we got it now. So good.
Also dog photos,
yes.
Please, always dog photos wherever it's possible. And all of the other animals, of course. We always love it when we get messages with animal photos.
Yes, we do. If you want extra content, you want extra content. Early episodes, our Cinema Macabre series, where we basically break down a 50-minute episode for you in approximately an hour and a half. Tell you everything you never wanted to know about it. It's amazing. All the other nonsense.
In costume.
We do. It's going to cost you to get that kind of quality programming. And you can join us over on Patreon if you are interested. Thank you so much again to everyone who already supports the show. You keep the whole thing going. We really appreciate you so much more than we can ever tell you.
Absolutely. Yeah. We're also on Facebook. You can send us an email or even real mail. The P.O. Box and everything else is on our website, freshhellpodcast.com. Also, we always forget to say this, but recommend us. Recommend us to anyone you know who might be interested. I just gave our business card. Annie had business cards made years ago, and I just always hand it out to people I know. But now for the first time, I handed it out to somebody I don't know, which was our tour guide at the Natural Science Museum.
Hey,
and
I hand that
maybe
thing
you're
out
listening. Hi.
Like a prophet in the street. I'm like, that's a cool tattoo. Let me give you my card.
Picture you.
I like your bumper sticker. Let me leave this under your windshield wiper. Yeah. Any way that I don't have to actually talk to strangers and engage and like put myself out there. If I can just give them a card and be like, I think you might like this. Who can say? Yeah.
And that's it.
That's it.
Please tell your pets we said hi, hug them, cuddle them, treat them kindly, be kind to your fellow human being and also be kind to yourself once in a while.
Right.
You too matter.
You do. You do. And don't forget to love the unloved. Someone has to. And as Churchill once said, if you're going through hell,
keep going. Tschüss.
Bye. Oh, and happy Thanksgiving.
Every year. Every year.
Every year. Sorry.